It was just another cold morning until a lonely dog heard a sound coming from the forest. What she found would change lives forever. 3 lynx cubs on the brink of death. But what this dog did next, no one could have imagined. Subscribe now and watch this incredible story unfold. In the frostbitten silence of early morning, Ruby, a lone shepherd mixed with soulful amber eyes, trotted along the edge of Whispering Pines Forest in northern Montana. The bitter January wind ruffled her thick golden fur as she paused, ears perked toward faint sounds coming from deep within the dense woods. Something was calling to her, not with words, but with a desperate energy that tugged at her instincts. Ruby belonged to Sarah Winters, a wildlife photographer who lived in a modest cabin at the forest's edge. Sarah had rescued Ruby 3 years ago from the local shelter, and the bond between them had grown unbreakable. This morning, Sarah had left before dawn to photograph mountain landscapes, leaving Ruby to roam the fenced property. But Ruby had discovered a gap beneath the fence that she'd never noticed before, and curiosity had pulled her through it. Now, her acute sense of smell guided her deeper into the forest, her paws crunching on frozen pine needles as she followed a scent that was both familiar and alien. The morning sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows across her path. Ruby hesitated at the base of a massive fallen pine tree, her nose twitching with heightened awareness. The sounds grew clearer. Tiny, mewling cries, barely audible above the whisper of the wind. Ruby circled the fallen trunk cautiously, her instincts in conflict. Part of her urged caution, warning her of potential danger, but another part, something deeper and more primal, pushed her forward. Behind the massive trunk, nestled in a hollow created by exposed roots, she found them. 3 tiny lynx kittens, their spotted fur matted, their small bodies shivering violently against the morning chill. Ruby froze, her ancient canine instincts telling her to keep her distance from the wild cats. Yet these weren't the fearsome predators her DNA had programmed her to avoid. They were helpless infants, their eyes barely open, their tiny mouths opening and closing in silent pleas for their absent mother. Ruby sniffed the air thoroughly, circling the fallen tree multiple times. There was no recent scent of an adult lynx nearby. She understood, in her animal way, that these kittens were alone and vulnerable. They were dehydrated, their tiny ribs visible beneath their spotted fur, their movements growing weaker by the minute. The first turning point came in this moment of hesitation. Ruby's warm breath formed clouds in the frigid air as she wrestled with competing instincts. Leave them and return to safety, or stay and risk the unknown. The kittens' cries grew fainter. Nature was making its harsh decision. Without intervention, they wouldn't survive another hour in the brutal Montana winter. Something shifted in Ruby's amber eyes. A decision was made. With gentle precision that belied her size, she carefully took the first kitten by the scruff, lifting it just as a mother cat would. The tiny creature went limp instinctively, its survival mechanisms recognizing the proper hold. One by one, Ruby transported the kittens to a sheltered hollow she knew of, formed by exposed roots and covered with a natural canopy of fallen branches where morning sunlight warmed the ground. Ruby arranged the kittens in the warmest spot, then curled her body around them, sharing her heat. The kittens, too weak to protest this strange savior, nestled against her warm fur. For hours, Ruby remained motionless, except for the steady rise and fall of her breathing, warming the fragile lives against her body. By midday, the second turning point arrived in the form of a red-tailed hawk drawn by the movement below. The predator circled overhead, its keen eyes fixed on the vulnerable scene. Ruby sensed the threat immediately. Rising to her feet, placing herself between the kittens and the sky, she bared her teeth and let out a series of threatening barks that echoed through the silent forest. The hawk circled twice more before veering away, seeking easier prey. The kittens had warmed, but Ruby understood they needed more than heat to survive. They needed nourishment. Late in the afternoon, after ensuring the kittens were safely hidden and relatively warm in their shelter, Ruby reluctantly left them to search for food. She moved silently through the forest, her hunting instincts, dormant during her years as a companion to Sarah, now reawakening with unexpected precision. Within an hour, she had caught 2 field mice. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to keep the kittens alive until she figured out what to do next. When Ruby returned to the hollow, she found the kittens exactly where she'd left them, huddled together for warmth. She dropped the mice beside them, nudging the tiny creatures with her nose. The kittens, driven by hunger, attempted to feed, but they were too young to eat solid food. Ruby, following pure instinct, began to lick and nuzzle the mice, breaking the food down into smaller, more manageable pieces. Hours passed as Ruby patiently worked to feed the kittens, her gentle tongue guiding the smallest bits of nourishment into their mouths. By nightfall, they had taken in just enough to give them strength to continue fighting for survival. As darkness descended over Whispering Pines Forest, Ruby faced a difficult choice. Return home to Sarah, who would surely be worried sick by now, or remain with the kittens, who would certainly perish without her protection. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and predators would be on the prowl. The golden dog looked in the direction of home, where warmth and safety waited, then down at the 3 tiny lives curled against her. Their breathing had strengthened slightly. She could almost feel their tiny hearts beating against her own. With a soft whine that carried her apology to her absent human, Ruby settled more firmly around the kittens, creating a living fortress against the dangers of the night. The stars emerged one by one above the canopy as Ruby kept vigilant watch, her ears constantly rotating to catch any sounds of approaching threats. Miles away, Sarah Winters paced her cabin floor, flashlight in hand, periodically calling Ruby's name into the darkness. She'd returned home at dusk to find her beloved companion missing, something that had never happened before. Sarah's worry grew with each passing hour, but the forest was too vast and too dangerous to search at night. She would have to wait until morning, hoping against hope that Ruby would find her way home. Back in the forest hollow, one of the Lynx kittens stirred in its sleep, tiny paws kneading against Ruby's warm belly in an instinctive gesture. Ruby gently nuzzled the kitten, settling it back into sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. For tonight, they had survived. 4 heartbeats in harmony within the vast, indifferent wilderness. As the first light of dawn crept through the trees, Ruby was already alert. Something had changed. A new scent hung in the air, the unmistakable musk of wolf. The 3rd turning point had arrived, and with it, new danger. Ruby's ears flattened against her head as she picked up the faint sound of movement some distance away. A lone wolf, perhaps, or worse, a pack, had entered this part of the forest. Ruby knew she couldn't fight off a wolf, much less multiple wolves. Her protective instincts kicked into high gear as she carefully gathered the kittens once more. She needed to move them somewhere safer, somewhere the wolves wouldn't easily find them. The kittens, slightly stronger after a night of warmth and minimal nourishment, mewled softly as Ruby gently carried them deeper into the forest, away from the approaching threat. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the denser section of forest where Ruby now led her unusual charges. She moved with purpose, seeming to know exactly where she was headed. After nearly an hour of careful travel, she reached a small, naturally formed den beneath the twisted roots of an ancient oak. It was dry, protected from the wind, and most importantly, had only one entrance that Ruby could guard. As she settled the kittens into this new sanctuary, Ruby's sensitive hearing picked up the distant sound of human voices. The 4th turning point approached, bringing with it a different kind of threat. Ruby's instinct to bark at the human presence warred with her protective drive. Barking would reveal their location, not just to the humans, but to any predators in the area. Instead, she pressed herself deeper into the den, her body curled protectively around the kittens, her breathing shallow and controlled. The humans Ruby heard were part of the Whispering Pines conservation team, led by Jack Thompson, a rugged forest ranger with 20 years of experience in wildlife management. Alongside him walked Mia Chen, a young wildlife biologist specializing in North American predators. They were conducting their monthly survey of the lynx population, which had been declining alarmingly in recent years. "The mother lynx we tagged last season should have birthed her litter by now," Mia said, checking the coordinates on her GPS device. Her tracking collar showed activity in this area for weeks, then suddenly stopped transmitting 3 days ago. Jack's weathered face creased with concern. Could be a malfunction, or something worse. He didn't need to elaborate. They both knew the challenges facing the endangered feline population, from habitat loss to poaching. As they moved through the forest, following the last known coordinates of the female lynx, they were unaware of Ruby's watchful eyes tracking their every move from the hidden den. The dog's muscles remained tense, ready to defend her adopted family if necessary, though a part of her, the part that had spent years among humans, recognized these two-legged creatures as potentially helpful rather than threatening. The conservation team passed within 50 yards of the hidden den, close enough for Ruby to catch their scent, but not close enough to discover her secret. Once they had moved on, Ruby relaxed slightly, turning her attention back to the kittens. One of them, the smallest of the three, had begun to show worrying signs of weakness. This fifth turning point arrived with brutal clarity. The smallest. Kitten's breathing had become labored, its tiny body trembling despite the warmth of Ruby's fur. Ruby nudged the kitten gently, licking it with increasing urgency, instinctively trying to stimulate its systems. For hours, she worked tirelessly, cleaning and warming the struggling kitten, barely taking time to rest. By nightfall, her efforts seemed to be working. The kitten's breathing had stabilized, though it remained the weakest of the three. Ruby had not left the den all day, forgoing her own need for food and water to tend to the critically ill kitten. Her dedication was unwavering, her focus absolute. Miles away, Sarah Winters had spent the entire day searching for Ruby. She had contacted the local ranger station, filed a missing pet report, and posted flyers throughout the small Montana town of Pine Ridge. Now, as darkness fell for the second night, she sat on her porch, a mug of cold coffee clutched in her trembling hands, fighting back tears of worry and exhaustion. "Where are you, girl?" she whispered into the gathering darkness, her voice catching. "Please come home." Back in the forest, Ruby's ears perked up as if she had heard Sarah's plea carried on the wind. For a brief moment, her resolve wavered. The pull toward home, towards Sarah, was almost overwhelming, but then the smallest kitten stirred against her side, and Ruby's choice was made again. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Dawn of the third day brought new challenges. The kittens were growing stronger, except for the smallest one, which still needed constant attention. Ruby had to leave the den to find food, both for herself and for the growing kittens. She carefully covered them with leaves and soft forest debris for insulation, then slipped out into the early morning light. The forest was coming alive with the sounds of birds and small creatures. Ruby moved silently, her hunting instincts now fully reawakened. She managed to catch 3 field mice and found a patch of wild berries, instinctively gathering both meat and plant matter. As she was returning to the den, a new scent stopped her in her tracks. The unmistakable smell of a predator had crossed her path. Ruby carefully set down her bounty and investigated. The tracks were fresh, the distinctive paw prints of a wolf heading in the direction of the den. The 6th turning point had arrived. The predator was tracking her, following her scent trail directly toward the vulnerable kittens. With no time to lose, Ruby gathered her food and raced back to the den by a different route, hoping to intercept the wolf before it discovered her precious charges. She arrived just in time to see a large gray wolf sniffing around the entrance to the den. Without hesitation, Ruby dropped her food and charged, her hackles raised, teeth bared in a ferocious display. The wolf, startled by the sudden appearance of the dog, hesitated just long enough for Ruby to position herself between the predator and the den entrance. What followed was a tense standoff, with Ruby making herself appear as large and threatening as possible, growling and snapping whenever the wolf tried to circle around her. The confrontation lasted several minutes, a deadly dance of feints and threats, until finally the wolf decided this particular meal wasn't worth the fight. It retreated slowly, maintaining eye contact until it disappeared among the trees. Ruby remained on high alert for hours afterward, standing guard at the den entrance. Only when she was certain the threat had truly passed did she retrieve the food she had dropped and return to the kittens. They were hungry and crying softly, the smallest one notably quieter than the others. For the next 3 days, a routine developed. Ruby would leave the den briefly to hunt and gather food, always taking different routes to confuse any predators, then return to feed and care for the kittens. She had developed a system for feeding them, chewing the meat into a paste that the kittens could more easily consume. They were growing stronger daily, their eyes now fully open, their movements more coordinated. The smallest kitten, however, continued to struggle. Despite Ruby's constant attention, it remained weaker than its siblings. The 7th turning point came on the morning of the 6th day, when Ruby woke to find the smallest kitten barely moving, its breathing shallow. In a display of incredible maternal instinct, Ruby spent hours licking and nuzzling the kitten, trying desperately to revive it. She didn't leave the den at all that day, not even to find food for herself. Her entire being was focused on saving this tiny life. By nightfall, her persistence was rewarded. The kitten began to respond, taking small amounts of food, its breathing becoming more regular. It was a turning point, not just for the kitten, but for Ruby as well. She had faced the worst and prevailed. The bond between her and these wild creatures had deepened beyond mere protection. She had become their mother in every way that mattered. As the days passed, winter tightened its grip on Whispering Pines Forest. The temperature dropped further, and snow began to fall, blanketing the landscape in crystalline white. Ruby knew that the den, while secure, wouldn't be enough to protect the kittens through the harsh Montana winter. They needed more substantial shelter and a more reliable food source. The 8th turning point arrived with the first heavy snowfall. Ruby stood at the entrance of the den, watching the white flakes accumulate on the forest floor, and made the most dangerous decision yet. She would lead the kittens to the conservation station she had seen during her hunting expeditions. It was a risk, exposing the kittens to the cold and potentially to humans. But staying meant certain hardship as the winter deepened. The journey would be perilous. The kittens were still young, not yet coordinated enough to travel efficiently on their own. Ruby would have to carry them, one by one, across nearly a mile of snow-covered forest, all while watching for predators and keeping track of the kittens she had already moved. As the snow continued to fall, Ruby began her mission. She gently picked up the strongest kitten first, ensuring it was securely held by the scruff, and set out toward the conservation station. The snow made travel difficult, the cold biting at her paws, but Ruby pressed on with unwavering determination. She found a sheltered spot halfway to the station, a hollow log that would provide temporary protection, and placed the first kitten inside before racing back to the den. The second kitten was next, making the same journey, being placed alongside its sibling in the log. The smallest kitten, the one that had given Ruby so much worry, was the last to be moved. Ruby was exhausted by now, her paws numb from the cold, her golden fur crusted with ice. Still, she gathered the tiny creature gently in her mouth and began the final journey. The snow was falling more heavily now, reducing visibility and making each step a challenge. Ruby's instincts, however, remained sharp. She navigated through the white landscape with incredible precision, her mental map of the forest guiding her infallibly toward the halfway point where the other kittens waited. Reunited with all 3 kittens in the hollow log, Ruby allowed herself only a brief rest before continuing the journey. The conservation station was still half a mile away, and daylight was fading. She needed to reach safety before darkness fell completely. One by one, she transported the kittens from the log to a position closer to the station, then repeated the process again and again, making incremental progress toward their destination. Each trip taxed her dwindling strength, but Ruby never faltered, never considered abandoning her mission. Finally, as the last light drained from the winter sky, Ruby and her 3 charges reached the perimeter of the Whispering Pines Conservation Station. Lights glowed in the windows of the main building, and the scent of humans hung in the air. Ruby paused at the edge of the clearing, the smallest kitten held gently in her mouth, the other 2 huddled against her legs in the snow. This was the moment of truth, the 9th turning point. After all they had been through, after all Ruby had sacrificed, everything now depended on what would happen next. The dog took a deep breath, looked down at the 3 lives she had fought so hard to save, and stepped out of the protective shadows of the forest into the open clearing. Inside the Whispering Pines Conservation Station, Jack Thompson was reviewing trail camera footage when movement on the security monitor caught his eye. Squinting at the grainy black and white image, he initially couldn't believe what he was seeing. A medium-sized dog standing in the clearing, something dangling from its mouth, with 2 small objects moving at its feet. "Mia!" he called, not taking his eyes off the monitor. "You need to see this." Mia Chen hurried over from her workstation, coffee mug in hand. "What is it?" Her eyes widened as she took in the strange tableau on the screen. "Is that a dog with kittens?" "Not just any kittens," Jack said, already reaching for his coat. "If I'm not mistaken, those are Lynx kittens." They rushed outside, moving slowly once they reached the clearing, not wanting to startle the exhausted animal. Ruby stood her ground as they approached, positioning herself protectively between the humans and the kittens, but not running away. She was too tired to flee, and some deep instinct told her these humans might be the kittens' last hope. "Easy there, girl," Jack said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. "Where did you come from?" Mia gasped as she got a closer look at the kittens. "Jack, these have to be from our missing female's litter. The marking patterns match her line." She looked at Ruby with newfound respect. "This dog must have found them after something happened to the mother." Jack nodded, noticing the dog's emaciated condition and ice-matted fur. "She's been caring for them for days, by the look of her." The 10th turning point came in this moment of first contact. Ruby, standing firm despite her exhaustion, locked eyes with Jack. There was an intelligence in her amber gaze that transcended species, a clear communication. "I've brought them this far. Help them." Jack understood. With slow, deliberate movements, he removed his outer jacket and laid it on the ground. "Let's see if she'll let us take them inside." Ruby watched intently as Jack gently reached for the first kitten. She tensed, but didn't interfere as he carefully placed it on his jacket. The second kitten followed. When Jack reached for the smallest, under still in Ruby's mouth, she hesitated only briefly before allowing him to take it. "Good girl," Jack murmured, genuine admiration in his voice. "You've done an amazing job. Now let us help." With all 3 kittens wrapped in his jacket, Jack stood slowly. "Mia, See if you can get the dog to follow us inside. Slowly now." Mia extended her hand to Ruby, who sniffed it cautiously. "Come on, girl, it's warm inside. You need care too." To their surprise, Ruby followed them willingly into the station, her eyes never leaving the bundle containing the kittens. Once inside the heated building, the contrast with the bitter cold outside was stark. Ruby's body began to tremble as her frozen muscles responded to the sudden warmth. "Get the emergency veterinary kit," Jack instructed as he carefully unwrapped the kittens on an examination table. "And find something for the dog to eat and drink. She's severely dehydrated." Mia quickly filled a bowl with water and placed it near Ruby, who lapped at it gratefully but kept her position where she could see the kittens. Mia then prepared a mixture of wet dog food and warm broth, which Ruby devoured in seconds. Meanwhile, Jack was examining the Lynx kittens with the practiced hands of someone who had worked with wildlife for decades. They're malnourished and dehydrated, but remarkably healthy considering the circumstances, he reported. "I'd estimate they're about 3 weeks old." "That's consistent with when the mother's collar stopped transmitting," Mia noted, gently stroking Ruby's head. "This dog has been caring for them for at least a week, maybe longer." The smallest kitten began to mew weakly, its tiny paws kneading the air. Ruby immediately tried to move toward it, whining anxiously. "It's okay, girl," Mia soothed. "We're going to help them." To Jack, she added, "She's incredibly bonded with them, especially the small one." Jack nodded, preparing formula in tiny bottles designed for wildlife rehabilitation. "Let's see if they'll take this." He carefully fed each kitten, starting with the weakest one. Ruby watched every movement with intense concentration, only relaxing when all 3 kittens had eaten and were sleeping peacefully under a heat lamp. "Now, what about you?" Mia said to Ruby, examining her for injuries. "No collar, but she's definitely someone's pet, well cared for before all this." She found a small wound on Ruby's leg that had become infected, likely from one of her encounters with predators while protecting the kittens. As Mia cleaned and treated the wound, Jack made some calls. First to local veterinarians, then to the regional animal shelter to report finding Ruby. "Someone must be looking for her," he said, hanging up the phone. "The shelter will check for microchips when we bring her in tomorrow." At the word shelter, Mia glanced up sharply. "We can't separate her from these kittens, Jack. Look at the bond she has with them. I've never seen anything like it." Jack sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I understand, but we have protocols. The Lynx kittens need specialized care, and she needs to be returned to her owner if possible." The 11th turning point came later that night. Jack and Mia had prepared a makeshift bed for Ruby, near where the kittens were resting under their heat lamp. Though exhausted beyond measure, Ruby refused to sleep, maintaining her vigilant watch over her adopted family. Around midnight, the smallest kitten began to struggle, its breathing becoming labored again. Ruby was on her feet, instantly pawing gently at the enclosure and whining to alert the humans. Mia, who had been dozing on a cot nearby, woke immediately. "What is it, girl?" Ruby's distress directed her attention to the struggling kitten. Mia quickly realized something was wrong and woke Jack, who had fallen asleep at his desk. "The little one's crashing," she said urgently, "temperatures dropping, breathing's irregular." Jack immediately began emergency procedures, administering fluids and medication while Mia monitored the kitten's vital signs. Ruby watched anxiously, pacing back and forth, occasionally emitting soft whines of concern. After an intense hour of intervention, the kitten stabilized. Jack sat back, exhausted, but relieved. "If Ruby hadn't alerted us," he left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. The kitten would have succumbed without her vigilance. This incident marked a significant shift in Jack's thinking. The next morning, instead of calling the shelter to collect Ruby, He made a different call to Sarah Winters, whose contact information had just been matched to Ruby's microchip. Sarah's voice broke when she heard the news. "She's alive. Where? I've been searching everywhere." "She's at the Whispering Pines Conservation Station," Jack explained, "and Ms. Winters, she's done something extraordinary." When Sarah arrived at the station an hour later, her face tear-streaked and hopeful. The reunion with Ruby was emotional for everyone present. Ruby bounded to Sarah with joyful recognition, tail wagging furiously as she received hugs and tearful endearments from her beloved human. But then, remarkably, Ruby turned and trotted back to the enclosure where the Lynx kittens were resting, looking back at Sarah as if to say, "Come see what I've done." "They're orphaned Lynx kittens," Mia explained, leading Sarah to the enclosure. "Ruby found them in the forest and has been caring for them for days. She saved their lives, brought them here through the snowstorm. We've never seen anything like it." Sarah knelt beside the enclosure, watching in amazement as Ruby gently nuzzled each kitten through the mesh. "She always had a big heart," she said softly. "But this is beyond anything I could have imagined." The 12th turning point arrived with Sarah's next words. "What happens to them now?" Jack explained the rehabilitation protocol for orphaned wildlife, how the kittens would be raised with minimal human contact, taught to hunt, and eventually released back into the wild when they were old enough to survive independently. "It's a specialized process," he concluded. "These are endangered animals. Their successful rehabilitation and release is crucial for the species." Sarah nodded slowly, watching Ruby's continued attention to the kittens. Then she asked the question that would change everything. Would it help if Ruby stayed involved? Mia and Jack exchanged surprised glances. "What do you mean?" Mia asked. "I'm a wildlife photographer," Sarah explained. "I work from home, often gone for just a few hours at a time. If Ruby's presence would benefit these kittens, maybe there's a way we could be part of their rehabilitation." The suggestion was unprecedented. Allowing a domestic dog to participate in the rehabilitation of endangered wildlife went against standard protocols. Yet the evidence of Ruby's positive influence was undeniable. "Let me make some calls," Jack said thoughtfully. "This isn't standard procedure, but then again, nothing about this situation is standard." The next 48 hours were filled with consultations, phone calls to wildlife officials, and careful documentation of Ruby's interactions with the Lynx kittens. Experts were skeptical until they reviewed the security footage showing Ruby's arrival at the station and witnessed firsthand her continued gentle care of the kittens. Dr. Eleanor Reed, the regional wildlife veterinary specialist, finally gave her professional assessment. "The bond is already formed. At this young age, separating them completely from the dog could cause significant stress, potentially compromising their development. Given the unique circumstances, I'm recommending a modified protocol." This professional endorsement was the 13th turning point. A pioneering rehabilitation plan was developed, one that would allow Ruby to continue visiting the kittens regularly under supervision, while the standard wildlife rehabilitation protocols were otherwise followed. Sarah, who lived just 20 minutes from the conservation station, agreed to bring Ruby for daily visits. "She's earned the right to see this through," she said, rubbing Ruby's ears affectionately. As the Lynx kittens grew stronger, their interaction with Ruby evolved. What had begun as complete dependence gradually transformed into playful companionship. The kittens would pounce on Ruby's tail, wrestle with her paws, and snuggle against her warm body during their supervised sessions together. 3 months after Ruby's extraordinary rescue, the Whispering Pines Conservation Station had been transformed. What had begun as an unprecedented exception to wildlife rehabilitation protocols had evolved into a groundbreaking program, drawing attention from conservation experts across the country. The three lynx kittens, now officially named Sierra, Aspen, and Little Willow, the smallest one who had struggled so much, had grown from helpless infants into rambunctious juveniles with distinctive personalities. Their rehabilitation enclosure had been expanded multiple times to accommodate their increasing size and energy, now encompassing a large outdoor area where they could practice their climbing and hunting skills. Ruby's role had shifted as well. Where once she had been a surrogate mother, she was now more of a playmate and teacher. Each morning, Sarah would bring Ruby to the station for what the staff had come to call Lynx lessons, supervised sessions, where Ruby would demonstrate hunting techniques, territorial awareness, and other essential skills the young lynx would need in the wild. "It's remarkable how she adjusts her behavior to teach them," Mia observed one morning, watching Ruby deliberately slow her movements as she stalked through the underbrush in the enclosure, showing the young lynx how to approach prey. "She instinctively understands what they need to learn." Jack nodded, making notes on his tablet. The programs exceeded all expectations. Dr. Reed wants to present our findings at the National Wildlife Rehabilitation Conference next month. The unexpected success had brought other changes as well. Funding had increased as news of the unique rehabilitation method spread, allowing the station to hire additional staff and expand its facilities. Sarah, whose photographs of Ruby and the lynx kittens had gone viral online, had been commissioned by National Geographic for a feature article, bringing further attention to the conservation efforts at Whispering Pines. But with success came new challenges. The 14th turning point arrived on a crisp spring morning when Jack called a meeting with Sarah, Mia, and Dr. Reed. "We need to discuss the next phase," he began, his expression serious. "The kittens are developing right on schedule. In about 2 months, they'll need to begin the final stage of rehabilitation, learning to hunt live prey and developing complete independence from human care." Dr. Reed nodded. "Which means we need to start reducing Ruby's interaction with them. Gradually, of course, but steadily." Sarah felt her heart sink. Though she had always known this day would come, the reality of it was more difficult than she had anticipated. Ruby had become so deeply bonded with the lynx that separation seemed almost cruel. "How will Ruby understand?" she asked softly, stroking her dog's golden fur. "She's poured everything into raising them." Mia, who had grown close to both Sarah and Ruby over the past months, offered a gentle smile. "Ruby's smarter than we give her credit for. She's been preparing them for independence all along. On some level, I think she understands this isn't forever." The transition began the following week. Ruby's daily visits were shortened incrementally, and the nature of her interaction with the lynx was carefully modified. Where previously she had been allowed direct physical contact with them, now she would often watch from behind a partition, present but not directly engaging. The 15th turning point came with Ruby's response to these changes. Rather than showing distress or confusion, she seemed to accept, even embrace, her evolving role. She would sit calmly watching as the young lynx practiced their hunting skills on mechanical prey devices designed by the rehabilitation team. Occasionally, she would bark encouragement when one of them made a particularly good pounce or stalk, her tail wagging with what looked remarkably like pride. "She knows," Sarah said one afternoon, tears glistening in her eyes as she watched Ruby observing the lynx from a distance. "She understands they're growing up, that they need to become wild." As spring turned to early summer, the lynx continued to develop. Their spotted coats gleamed with health, their movements becoming increasingly confident and precise. Willow, once the frailest, had grown into the most agile of the three, her small size giving her advantages in speed and stealth that her siblings couldn't match. The 16th turning point arrived when the lynx encountered their first live prey, rabbits released into their enclosure under careful supervision. This was a critical test. If they couldn't hunt successfully, their chances of survival in the wild would be severely compromised. Ruby watched from behind the observation glass as the three young lynx crouched in the underbrush, their bodies low to the ground, eyes fixed on the rabbits that had been introduced to their enclosure. The rehabilitation team held their breath, knowing how much rode on this moment. Sierra was the first to move, her powerful hind legs propelling her forward in a burst of speed. But her approach was too direct, too obvious. The rabbit easily evaded her, darting into the brush. Aspen tried next, with similar results. The young lynx were applying their practice techniques, but something was missing. The final piece of the hunting puzzle that separated play from survival. Ruby began to pace anxiously behind the glass, whining softly as she watched the lynx's unsuccessful attempts. Sarah placed a comforting hand on her head, but Ruby's distress only increased as Willow, the smallest lynx, prepared for her attempt. Then, in a moment that would later be described in Dr. Reed's scientific paper as unprecedented cross-species communication, Ruby let out a specific pattern of barks, 3 short, 1 long, the exact signal she had used during training sessions to indicate stillness followed by action. Willow, who had been about to leap, froze. Her ears swiveled toward Ruby's bark. Then, instead of charging directly, she sank lower into the grass, becoming nearly invisible. She waited, perfectly still, as the rabbit cautiously emerged from cover. Only when it had moved within striking distance did Willow pounce, a perfect arcing leap that landed her squarely on target. "She's coaching them," Jack whispered in disbelief, from behind the glass. The 17th turning point unfolded. Over the next hour, as Sierra and Aspen, following their siblings' successful example and responding to Ruby's continued signals, also made their first kills. The rehabilitation team watched in amazement as Ruby effectively coordinated the young predator's hunting strategy without directly participating. "This changes everything," Dr. Reed said, her voice filled with wonder. "Ruby isn't just a surrogate mother. She's become a legitimate teacher. She's conveying actual hunting techniques across species barriers." The success of the hunting test accelerated the timeline for the lynx's eventual release. With their critical hunting skills developing rapidly under Ruby's continued guidance, they were progressing faster than anyone had anticipated. The rehabilitation team began making preparations for the final phase, selecting the perfect release site deep in the protected wilderness where the young lynx would have the best chance of establishing their own territories. As the release date approached, Ruby's visits were reduced further, now occurring only every 3rd day. The separation was carefully managed to help both Ruby and the lynx adjust gradually to their impending permanent parting. The 18th turning point came unexpectedly during what was scheduled to be Ruby's 3rd to last visit. Sarah had brought her to the observation area as usual. But when they arrived, the lynx were nowhere to be seen in their enclosure. "Where are they?" Sarah asked, noticing Ruby's confusion as she pressed her nose to the glass, searching for her charges. Jack appeared in the doorway, his expression both sad and excited. "There's been a change of plans. Dr. Reed received satellite tracking data showing a new female lynx has established territory just north of our planned release site. The conditions are perfect: abundant prey, minimal human interference, and the potential for the siblings to eventually find mates. We had to move quickly." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "You mean?" "They've already been transported to the release site," Jack confirmed gently. "The team left at dawn. I'm sorry we couldn't give you and Ruby a proper goodbye, but Dr. Reed felt a clean break would be easier on everyone." Ruby seemed to understand something significant had occurred. She whined softly, moving from the observation window to the door of the now empty rehabilitation enclosure, her nose working frantically to pick up the lynx's scent. "I know, girl," Sarah said, kneeling beside her faithful companion. "They've gone home to the forest. You did it. You saved them." The 19th turning point arrived that evening when Dr. Reed called from the release site with news. The lynx, had been successfully released, each fitted with a small tracking collar that would allow the team to monitor their progress for the first critical year. Initial readings showed they were staying together as a sibling group, moving confidently through their new territory. They didn't hesitate, Dr. Reed reported over the speakerphone. When we opened the transport cages, they simply stepped out, sniffed the air, and moved into the forest like they belonged there. No fear, no confusion, just 3 young predators coming home. While everyone celebrated this successful outcome, there was an unmistakable melancholy hanging over the conservation station. For months, the lives of the staff had revolved around the orphaned Lynx and their remarkable canine guardian. Now, with their mission accomplished, a sense of loss settled over the team. Ruby, especially, seemed at loose ends. Though she continued her normal life with Sarah, accompanying her on photography expeditions, enjoying long walks through the mountains, there was a noticeable change in her behavior. She would often stop during their forest hikes, ears perked, listening intently as if hoping to catch the familiar sounds of her adopted family. The 20th and most dramatic turning point came 2 weeks after the release. Sarah had brought Ruby to the conservation station to help Jack and Mia organize the extensive documentation of the rehabilitation program. Ruby was dozing under Sarah's desk when she suddenly leapt to her feet, ears forward, tail rigid with attention. "What is it, girl?" Sarah asked, startled by the abrupt movement. Ruby raced to the door, pawing frantically to be let out. Jack, recognizing the intensity of her behavior, quickly opened the door. Ruby bolted outside, stopping at the edge of the clearing to bark urgently back at the humans. "Something's wrong," Mia said, grabbing her jacket. "I've never seen her this agitated." They followed Ruby as she led them into the forest, moving with purpose along a trail that eventually connected to the wilderness area where the Lynx had been released. After nearly 2 miles of rapid hiking, with Ruby pausing occasionally to ensure they were still following, they heard it, the distinctive distress cry of a lynx. "That's Willow," Mia exclaimed, recognizing the unique vocal signature of the smallest lynx. They found her trapped in an illegal snare that had been set by poachers, a cruel metal wire that had tightened around her hind leg. Blood matted her fur, but she was very much alive, hissing and spitting at their approach. Until she saw Ruby. The transformation was immediate. Willow's aggressive posture relaxed, her hissing stopped, and she let out a soft, chirping sound that the team had often heard her use when greeting Ruby during their rehabilitation sessions. "She recognizes her," Sarah whispered, amazed. Ruby approached Willow cautiously, licking her face and then gently nosing at the snare. Jack moved forward with wire cutters, and remarkably, with Ruby's calming presence, Willow allowed him to carefully free her injured leg. "The wound's deep, but doesn't appear to have damaged any tendons," Jack assessed, carefully examining Willow. "We need to get her back to the station for treatment." The 21st turning point came during Willow's recovery. What was initially planned as a brief medical intervention, treat the wound, allow a short recovery period, then re-release. The young lynx evolved into something much more significant when tracking data revealed that Sierra and Aspen had been killed by the same poachers who had set the snare that trapped Willow. "We found their collars discarded near an illegal hunting camp," Officer Peterson of the Wildlife Protection Service reported grimly. "We're pursuing the suspects, but the evidence suggests they were targeting predators specifically." This devastating news transformed the conservation team's mission. Now, not only was Willow the sole survivor of the rescued litter, but the discovered poaching operation revealed a broader threat to all predators in the region. "We can't release her back into that area," Dr. Reed concluded after reviewing the evidence. "At least not until the poaching ring is completely shut down." "So, what happens to Willow now?" Sarah asked, watching as Ruby lay beside the recovering lynx's enclosure, the 2 animals seemingly drawing comfort from each other's presence. The answer came in the form of an unprecedented proposal. Dr. Reed, after consulting with wildlife officials and conservation experts, suggested that Willow become a permanent resident at the Whispering Pines Conservation Station, not merely as a captive animal, but as part of a groundbreaking ambassador program. Willow's unique bond with Ruby provides an unparalleled opportunity for education, Dr. Reed explained. Together, they tell a story that resonates with people in a way that traditional conservation messages simply can't match. The 22nd turning point marked the beginning of the Wilderness Bonds program at Whispering Pines. With special permits from wildlife authorities, Willow became the centerpiece of a new educational initiative designed to inspire public support for conservation efforts. Ruby, officially recognized as a conservation assistant, was a constant presence at Willow's side during carefully managed public presentations. Sarah, whose photography skills had already brought international attention to Ruby's initial rescue of the Lynx kittens, now found herself with a unique career opportunity. The conservation station offered her a permanent position as their media specialist, documenting the ongoing relationship between Ruby and Willow and developing educational materials for schools and conservation organizations. "It's not what I expected," Sarah admitted to Jack as they watched Ruby and Willow playing together in Willow's specially designed habitat. "When I moved to Montana to pursue wildlife photography, I never imagined this would be my life's work. Sometimes the most important paths are the ones we never plan to take," Jack replied, smiling as Ruby gently batted at Willow's playful paws. The Wilderness Bonds program quickly gained national recognition. School groups began visiting regularly, conservation donors increased their support, and most importantly, public awareness of the poaching threat to endangered species skyrocketed. The growing attention ultimately helped authorities apprehend the poaching ring that had killed Sierra and Aspen, leading to multiple arrests and the dismantling of an international wildlife trafficking operation. 1 year after Willow's rescue, from the snare, the Whispering Pines Conservation Station hosted a special event, the grand opening of their new Predator Conservation Center, a state-of-the-art facility funded largely by donations that had poured in after Ruby and Willow's story went viral. The governor of Montana attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, as did representatives from major conservation organizations from around the world. In her address to the assembled crowd, Dr. Reed summed up the journey that had brought them to this moment. What began with a dog's compassion for orphaned lynx kittens has grown into a movement that's changing how we approach wildlife conservation. Ruby and Willow have shown us that the boundaries we perceive between species are perhaps more fluid than we once believed. Their bond reminds us that empathy, protection, and love are not uniquely human traits. They're the birthright of all creatures. The 23rd and final turning point came on the afternoon following the ceremony. Sarah, Ruby, and Willow were resting in a quiet corner of the new facility, away from the crowds and cameras. Ruby lay with her head on Sarah's lap while Willow lounged nearby, the three of them forming a picture of contentment that crossed the boundaries of species and circumstance. Mia approached quietly, carrying a tablet. "Sarah, you need to see this." On the screen was a satellite image from one of the remote wildlife cameras deep in the Whispering Pines wilderness. There, clearly visible despite the grainy quality of the night vision footage, was a female lynx, and beside her 3 small kittens. "The DNA markers confirm it," Mia said, her voice filled with emotion. "That's a direct descendant of the same lynx line as Willow and her siblings. The species is recovering in this region." Sarah felt tears well in her eyes as she showed the image to Ruby, who tilted her head curiously at the screen. "See that, girl? That's what you made possible. Those kittens exist because you saved Willow's family line." Ruby simply wagged her tail, perhaps not understanding the words, but sensing the joy in Sarah's voice. Nearby, Willow stretched lazily, in a patch of sunlight, secure in the knowledge that she was home, protected and loved. In the years that followed, the Whispering Pines Conservation Center became a model for wildlife rehabilitation and education programs worldwide. Ruby and Willow remained its heart and soul, their unlikely friendship continuing to inspire visitors and conservationists alike. Ruby even helped train a new generation of conservation dogs, canines specifically taught to assist in wildlife rehabilitation efforts. Sarah's photographs and documentaries of Ruby and Willow won international awards, bringing crucial attention to endangered species protection. Jack expanded the center's research programs, while Mia developed new protocols for wildlife rehabilitation based on the lessons learned from Ruby's extraordinary intervention. And in the deep forests surrounding Whispering Pines, the lynx population slowly but steadily increased, each new generation a living testament to one golden dog's courage, compassion, and unwavering determination to protect lives so different from her own. As for Ruby herself, she seemed perfectly content with her new purpose in life. Each morning, she would greet Sarah with the same enthusiastic joy she always had, then trot eagerly to Willow's habitat, ready for another day of companionship and silent communication that transcended the barriers between their species. In quiet moments, Sarah would sometimes find Ruby gazing into the distant forest, her amber eyes reflective, as if remembering her journey through the snow with 3 tiny lives depending on her. In those moments, Sarah would simply sit beside her faithful friend, grateful for the reminder that love, in its purest form, recognizes no boundaries. Some might call what you did instinct, she would whisper to Ruby during these contemplative moments. But I know it was more than that. It was love, and love changes everything. Dear listeners, we hope Ruby and Willow's extraordinary journey has touched your heart. Their story reminds us that compassion knows no boundaries between species, and that even the most unlikely heroes can change destinies when guided by love. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of unexpected friendship and courage, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life. Don't miss our upcoming content. We're always working to find stories that will move and inspire you. We look forward to reading your comments and hearing which moments in Ruby's journey touched you the most.